Hi, this is Logan Garibay, and today I want to talk about Magpie Games' recent acquisition of the Avatar Last Airbender rights to make a tabletop role-playing game. So basically it's a licensed game and a new company that has won a major intellectual property, IP, a major IP's license. All right, so let's talk about this, because this, and here we go. Magpie's Games acquisition, like winning the license to make a Avatar Last Airbender game, has everything to do with Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I want to talk about it from the context of Dungeons and Dragons. All right, and also, what do licenses mean now for tabletop role-playing games overall? So this acquisition is very strange. Let's talk about it, okay? Because why did Magpie Games get Avatar Last Airbender? Why did they win that license, okay? And I want to talk about that, because I think it's really strange. So why would Avatar Last Airbender want a tabletop role-playing game, and why would Magpie Games win it? Well, first of all, the answer of why you would want a tabletop role-playing game, in my opinion, is not nearly as straightforward as you would think, okay? Because a lot of people think, oh, they just want to make money. It's not that simple, okay? When you have an intellectual property that is world famous, and Avatar Last Airbender truly is world famous, it trended top 10 for Netflix, a multi-billion-dollar company. And Netflix isn't just an average multi-billion-dollar country. There's actually well over 100 multi-billion-dollar global companies, right? But the reality is, Netflix is quite special. They are FANG, right? Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. Okay, FANG. It's the new acronym, right? And those are the big dogs in American like business, right? And those are global companies, but the vast majority of their momentum comes straight out of America, okay? And so basically, you know, Avatar Last Airbender trended for 2 months top 10 for Netflix. It was a absolutely massive hit for them. Huge hit, okay? So this is a world-known intellectual property. It's I've watched all of it. I've watched all of Avatar Last Airbender, and I've watched all of Korra, the Korra sequel, right? And I love it. I'm a huge fan of the show. But here's the thing. Why would the owners of Avatar Last Airbender allow a tabletop role-playing game to be made? And I know what you're going to say. You're going to go, it's for the greenbacks, buddy. It's for the dollars. I don't know about that, right? The biggest, most important, really high-rolling intellectual properties are not doing tabletop role-playing games right now as products, because the risk, in my opinion, far outweighs the reward. What kind of money are you going to make from a tabletop role-playing game? Dirt. You don't make almost any money from a tabletop role-playing game. They don't. Dungeons and Dragons makes a few $1 million, but they make less than $100 million a year. Do you know how little that is? It's really not a lot of money when it comes, especially when you're dealing with a massive globally famous intellectual property. $100 million is, and actually, to be clear, we think Dungeons and Dragons makes maybe between 50 and 75 million a year. 100 million a year is maybe 125 million a year now, is the entire tabletop role-playing game industry for the entire year. It is not a good, tabletop role-playing games are not a good business model, If you don't understand this, you need to do a little bit of research. Tabletop role-playing games are not a good business model. They really, really aren't. Now, what's the risk on a tabletop role-playing game? A lot, right? First of all, who are the biggest IPs that do not allow licenses of their products right now? There's some really big ones. You cannot play a licensed game of any DC comic book right now. None. Okay? I own the last book, which was like a Mutant Masterminds type game for a DC licensed, DC superheroes licensed game. You can't buy one. There's nothing on the market right now, right? Marvel is exactly the same. You cannot buy a Marvel tabletop role-playing game today off the shelves. You can't do it, a current one. You can get stuff that's out of print, but you cannot buy legally a Marvel tabletop role-playing game, okay? And in addition to that, Harry Potter has never been available as a tabletop role-playing game. And the reality is the vast majority of incredibly popular, incredibly successful IPs don't touch tabletop role-playing games with a 10-foot pole, okay? So how did Magpie win this? Okay, so you have this multi-$100 million intellectual property, maybe worth over $1 billion, right? By the way, Star Wars sold for $4 billion well over a decade ago, okay? It's not an exaggeration at all to say that the Avatar Last Airbender could be worth a $1 billion, it could be a $1 billion IP, right? It's worth a lot, right? And so basically, how did they win this? So Magpie Games won the right to make this tabletop role-playing game. Why? Boy, I'll tell you, looking at it, I don't know why. Because what has Magpie Games made? They've made two games that I have ever heard of. Okay, they've made about 10 games. I just looked on their site. They have about 10 games that they created. Right, 2 of them were recognizable to me, and I am heavy into tabletop role playing games. Right, so if I ain't heard your games, they are really very obscure. Right, but the 2 games they made that I have heard of are Masks and the Bluebeard's Bride. Now, what are these games? These are powered by the Apocalypse PBTA games. What? Like, those aren't making any money, right? Like, Masks never. I would be shocked if Masks has ever even made even $1 million, right? I would be shocked. In fact, I would be shocked if you took all the sales for Masks and Bluebeard's Bride and they amounted to even a single $1 million in USD sales. I would be shocked. Okay, the reality is I think incredibly few actual print versions of those games have been sold. Maybe 50,000 of each, maybe, right? Very, very tiny numbers that no global IP would be interested. So if you're not going for the money, why would you go for a license? Well, there are some good reasons why I think large, globally famous intellectual properties would seek out a tabletop role-playing game. Tabletop role-playing games have the absolute best customer base in the world for products. It is crazy smart people, crazy creative people, like highly intelligent people, highly charismatic people, people with a ton of earning potential, right? And you're getting them young, or you're getting them old, right? And the reality is they are incredibly powerful, okay? As far as just like knowing who buys tabletop role-playing games, the data there is incredibly valuable because many of them are high up in the professions they're in, at the top tiers. And the reason why is tabletop role-playing games are like, you're looking at people who are like, I want to read 250 to 750 pages to read a game. There you go, right? There's everybody there makes a fortune or is going to make a fortune someday, right? And that's the reality of it. Everybody there, it's upper middle class to millionaires. That's the reality of it, right? And honestly, I think it would be very hard to really find a lot of top earners who have never played Dungeons and Dragons at some point, okay? And so the reason why you would want to make a tabletop role-playing game is you would want to make your brand incredibly special and get goodwill with America's world breakers, right? Like America's top earners and America's real go-getters. And so that's why this would be good. Now, the other thing though is, why would Wizards of the Coast not be interested in making this game? Because if Wizards of the Coast wanted to make the Avatar Last Airbender, why on earth would the makers of that game choose Magpie Games instead, right? They can do nothing. That Magpie Games has the ability to do exactly zero that Wizards of the Coast can't do 100 times better. Product distribution, quality of product, bringing celebrities to play it. Like there's a list of 100 things to make a successful tabletop role-playing game that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro Gaming can do that Magpie Game has no hope of doing, right? Because they don't have scale, right? And all of their games are minor sellers, right? So the reality is, unfortunately, I hate to say, I hate the words I don't know, but I really am not sure why Magpie Games won this license. This is a massive license, and it should have went to the best company in the industry. And who should have had this, right? I think Monte Cook Games was a good candidate for it. They built Invisible Sun, right? That's really big scale, right? Hasbro Gaming would have been a good one. Fantasy Flight Games, right? These are proven companies that have games that have made millions and millions of dollars. I would be incredibly shocked if anything Magpie Games has ever made even $1 million US, right? Even Green Ronin, in my opinion, would have been a better pick. So I'm really not sure why Magpie Games won this license. And now, I am happy for an indie that kind of won the day and kind of got a surprise shocker victory, right? And I do think they have a possibility of making a good game. But I think there's a mystery here. I think there's a real mystery on why this game was even chosen. Last thing I'll say is, why are companies afraid of making tabletop role-playing games out of their intellectual properties? There's a good reason. I'll tell it to you right now. When you make a tabletop role-playing game, you give a very unusual, very misunderstood consent for others to build stories in your world with original characters they made. That gets messy from who owns this story, who owns this character, who owns this location, who owns this magic item which exists in this world. And that can get very weird. And frankly, I know for a fact that American law is way behind and has no ability to answer these questions meaningfully, right? And so that's why these large companies, that's why you cannot buy a DC, the biggest properties in the world, DC, Marvel, and DC and Marvel and Harry Potter are impossible to play as tabletop role-playing games. By the way, you can play Star Wars right now, but I think even that's spinning down. And I think that line is putting out less and less product all the time, right? And actually, it's one of the few survivors. Why do you think Magpie Games won this license property? I really, looking at it, I'm like, I do not know. This does not make a lot of sense to me. I'd love to hear your opinion. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.